Songler Audio is the kind of audio company that puts a smile on your face. Songler is a small company devoted to designing and hand-building unusual loudspeakers. The concepts used by designer Ken Songler, how's that for a lucky name, in some ways harken back to the early days of audio in the 30s and 50s. But these ideas are off the beaten path for modern designs, and Songler is trying to advance the art. A 7-year-old company making its own main drivers is also not the norm. The aesthetic used by Songler is also different. Now, sometimes different is good. Let's take a look. Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. If you enjoy our videos, you might also like our other work for audiophiles and music lovers. Written equipment reviews, editor's choice ratings, product news, and music reviews. Get the latest each week with a free subscription to our email newsletters. A link is in the description. We recently had the chance for a multi-hour private demonstration of the Songler S2x Loudspeaker. We like to bring viewers a wide range of products and technologies, and with new designs just entering production, or with very large speakers, or with products of small artisanal companies, it's often more practical to test drive the product in the field, at the factory, or at a dealer or a show. That's what we did with the Songler S2x. So this isn't a normal review. It's much more carefully executed, though, than a standard show visit. All right, let's do a product overview. The Songler S2x is priced at $65,000 per pair. It's sized at 47 inches high by 21 by 15 inches, which is pretty standard for today's full-range speakers. That's about where standard ends, though, because the Songler S2x is laden with differences. It uses what's often called a full-range driver, although this is actually a two-way design. However, the main driver, made as we said by Songler, runs from 120 hertz to the top of the audio band. So the full range nomenclature isn't too far off. Below 120 hertz, Songler uses an Acoustic Elegance 15-inch woofer. And the field coil is confined to the full range driver. That's and right. The subwoofer, woofer, whatever you call it, is a conventional magnetic system.
Right. Yep, it crosses over at 120 hertz. And then the LO15 low inductance acoustic elegance woofer takes over from that point forward just to get those lowest registers. And that's because...
And where's that crossover, did you say?
About 120 hertz.
Full-range drivers themselves generally use a so-called whizzer cone for treble. This design is thus coaxial, but there's not a crossover in the normal sense, although physics treats the radiation of the whizzer cone differently than with the main cone, which is why the whizzer is there. The cabinet is an open baffle for the entire frequency range, making the S2x a dipole design. Extending the dipole idea, Songler has put a whizzer cone on the back of the main driver, so that this is a full-range dipole. The driver basket is unusually open to the rear, reflecting Songler's interest in wide dispersion dipole operation. Dipoles can have bass advantages and drawbacks, as well as imaging advantages. The main cone uses Japanese washi paper made from mulberry fibers and a lambskin surround said to improve management of cone breakup. The main S2x Nova Type D driver features a different kind of magnetic system than is typical to generate cone movement. Normally, cone drivers use a permanent magnet, which, as you might imagine, is always generating a magnetic field. Contrast this with an electromagnet, as used on the S2x, which only generates a magnetic field when a current is applied to a wire coil, not the voice coil, that often surrounds a core made of material like iron that contains magnetic domains. This means that the driver has a power supply for the electromagnet in addition to being hooked up to a power amplifier to drive the voice coil. Well, why bother? Well, electromagnetism is complex and involves lots of calculus, but there are several possible reasons. One is that the magnetism of an electromagnet can be varied within limits by the amount of current applied to the magnetizing coil. In theory, this could be used to counteract nonlinearities. Or, this property could be used to ensure that the magnet is operating in the desired region at all times. Ken also points to the distinctive permeability characteristic of electromagnets. And He points out that precision assembly of field coil drivers is easier because assembly occurs with the driver off, meaning not with power on it, and assembly technicians aren't fighting the magnetic field. There are, of course, drawbacks as well, including added complexity and cost. As we always point out, it's hard or impossible to reason from the technical details to sound quality, so we listen, with our reference of the absolute sound. Okay, now for the sound quality section. During our listening session, the S2X was driven by Whammerdyne DAM2 Ultra 2A3 monoblock amps with 9.5 watts per channel. The specified efficiency of the S2X is 94 dB. We note that single driver speakers are often paired with low output tube power amps. Vinyl is a common source for such speakers, but in our listening, Songer used an Ineos Zenith Next Gen streamer, which was helpful if only because we could play a range of test tracks that we use for reviewing. Many things about this system are different, as I said before, from what we normally cover, which is why we wanted to spend extra time on this. Are single driver speakers with low power amplification something special or just something weird? After a few hours with a Songer S2X, I'm going to say that there's something special, but that idea needs to be characterized. If you're currently using Bowers & Wilkins 801s or Kef blades, and if you wonder what, if anything, is the next step beyond those speakers, the Songer S2X probably isn't it, because the S2X is playing to an entirely different set of musical interests. But if you find yourself left cold by the science-first wing of the audiophile world, Songer is worth a look, at least to calibrate your philosophy. Not that Songer isn't interested in science, because they are, but the premises and techniques and detailed goals here are just not the same as we're accustomed to. The Songer S2X does two things that are special in my evaluation. The first thing it does is to resolutely deal with excessive or overwrought or distorted treble about as well as a speaker alone can. So I would guess that the S2X follows a downward treble tilt similar to the -1 dB per octave slope that perceptual listening tests find is desired by typical listeners. I think this curve is more shaped in the case of the Songer than a monotonic tilt would imply, because the S2X has some top octave or 2 octaves of air and sparkle that you don't get from a pure tilt. I also think the upper mid-range is voiced on the warm side of reasonable possibilities, which again seems like a realistic choice if you're trying to stand out from the high-end crowd. In track after track, the S2X tended to sound relaxed but not lifeless. Remember that we were using digital as a source, and digital gremlins were de-emphasized nicely. At the same time, I would say the S2X doesn't sound quite as open as some more traditional speakers, although the small rooms used at audio shows make this tough to judge. If intimacy and warmth are important factors for you, this is a speaker you should hear. Sound staging was very good, by the way, just somewhat smaller than other systems in this price range. Ken emphasizes that some of these voicing and SQ features are greatly impacted by the amplifiers. I want to emphasize that I think this might be more the case with single driver systems than it is with traditional designs, and this extra tunability is something that attracts some listeners. If nothing else, going from say 4 watts at the low end of SET range to 12 watts or 20 watts or more isn't even remotely out of the question, while you aren't going to easily switch from 300 watts to 1200 watts in the traditional world. Then there are tube choices and output topologies and impedance interactions to consider. I think the bass of the S2X could win some friends. Dipole bass has advantages in the way it limits the impact of inevitable room modes, and the voicing of the bass on the S2X is appealing. My impression was that the S2X allows for real rooms and real tastes, so unlike many panel designs, it has strong output in the mid-bass. An overall sonic impression is also warranted and maybe the most important here. As a reviewer, I have to attend to many details and I have a lot of experience hearing all sorts of audio phenomena. But that analytical mode isn't how you listen to music, ideally. In analytical mode, I can find faults with lots of speakers. The Songer S2X is among those and maybe has a longer list of nits to pick. But what the S2X does well, and better than many speakers with a shorter list of peccadillos, is simply to make many kinds of music enjoyable and involving for a listener attuned to this approach. I played blues guitarist Samantha Fish's track Killer Be Kind, expecting the S2X to be slightly overwhelmed or maybe a lot overwhelmed by wailing guitars and punchy kick drum. But the S2X just made music and got everyone into it. Now, let's talk about design, a factor I don't always talk about but is important here. Another factor the Songer S2X offers, which I think some of you might find appealing, is that this is a handcrafted speaker. But in this case, it is hand craftsmanship you can see, and it's hand craftsmanship that you can understand. The cabinet, for example, simply doesn't look industrial or machine-made. The soft edges and the open baffle shape reinforce this idea. Then the metalwork trim and metal details are as artisanal as they are technological. Look, for example, at the main driver basket. It's a chrome piece, polished of course, with a shape different from typical drivers. The paper cone material is also different looking, a sense that's reinforced by the presence of the whizzer cones front and back. Even the Eminence woofer has a minimal surround and just doesn't look like other woofers. Since you can and probably will be using tube amplifiers and a tube preamp, you will also have an array of glowing tubes as part of your system, which are undoubtedly industrial, but on the other hand, clearly of another era. The story of the design effort and tuning of the speaker, along with the options for different voicings with different ancillary equipment, add to the sense of a work of art rather than just a product. This vibe may or may not appeal to you, but I came to think of it as a key feature of the Songer S2X. All right. Let's summarize. The Songer S2X looks different and sounds different. For the customers who fit with its ethos, I think this will translate as looks beautiful and sounds right. Add to that the clear connections with real people like Ken Songer and his wife Kimberly, and you have an attractive concept that goes beyond a simple transaction. I know a lot of people who want to keep this aspect of romanticism in audio, and a visit with Songer Audio is a great reminder of why. I hope you've enjoyed this brief listening evaluation of the Songer Audio S2X speaker. If you have, we hope you'll check back and look at our other videos. And we hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching.